piece of cake.
In the past few years, we've seen an explosion of what has popularly been called the sharing economy. For those unfamiliar, this is a loose term for apps like Uber, Airbnb, and TaskRabbit that facilitate peer-to-peer economic interactions. From Uber's perspective, the narrative around this revolutionary shift in economic relations is that it's radically improving our lives. Not only can consumers in urban areas find rides faster than ever, but workers too are provided with new flexibility, and in some cases higher income than other minimum wage jobs. Here's co-founder Travis Kalanick arguing just that.
In the Uber world, you can use your own car. You don't pay $40,000 to rent a vehicle. You make more dollars per hour, and it's flexible. You don't have a shift. You can turn on your work when you want to, and you can turn it off. You want to pick up your kids from school, turn it off. If you want to go hang out with some friends, turn it off.
Now, full disclosure, I'm not saying I completely disagree with Kalanick. I myself drove for Postmates before I had a full-time job. And it truly was very liberating driving whenever I wanted, turning the app on and off as I pleased. But even though there are a few added conveniences for drivers, that's not the whole story. The important subtext when Kalanick argues that he's improving workers' lives is that he's claiming to really care about his company's effect on the quality of life for workers in the 21st century. I encourage you to check out my video on what I called the enlightened brand, because it's as relevant here as ever. Basically, not only is Uber selling their product, but like Apple, like Google, they're also selling a brand image that claims to really care about society as a whole, to be a force of progress and improvement, not just for their profit margins, but for everyone, drivers and riders alike. The problem is, when you investigate just a little bit further into Uber's relationship with their drivers, this image of themselves as an enlightened brand completely falls apart. Though there are a number of topics I could explore here, in this video I'm going to focus in on the debate over whether or not Uber drivers deserve normal employee benefits, like healthcare, pensions, minimum wage, and paid breaks. Now, on its face, this topic might seem like a no-brainer. Under the Affordable Care Act, more commonly known as Obamacare, full-time employees at companies with 50 or more workers are eligible for benefits. A full-time employee is defined as someone who works at least 30 hours a week or 130 hours a month on average. So anyone who drives for Uber at least 30 hours a week should get employee benefits, right?
Oh yeah, no, you know what, no.
Well, it turns out it's not that simple, because instead of calling their drivers employees, they call them partners.
Moving forward, we're taking into consideration what's good for our driver partners.
And they classify these partners as independent contractors. What this means is that Uber isn't actually employing their drivers, they're simply hiring a fleet of independent drivers on a task-by-task basis. So now, the millions of dollars large corporations usually spend to provide their workers healthcare, paid breaks, and pensions is coming directly out of those workers' pockets. The workers, rather than the multi-billion-dollar corporation, bear the costs. Now, the law defines an employer as one who has the power or right to control and direct the employee in the material details of how the work is to be performed. And Uber clearly does have meaningful control over its drivers. If drivers fall below the minimum average rating that Uber decides upon, they can be banned from the app. The fares are negotiated by Uber, not by the drivers, and the drivers need to abide by Uber's standard of conduct. Here's a text message received by a driver that says their account is being put on hold for displaying advertisements for other ride-sharing companies. Here's one that reprimands a driver for canceling too many rides in a day. And whether or not you think these are reasonable or unreasonable standards of conduct, it's clear that they are, in fact, standards of conduct. They constitute control over the details of the work to be performed. And many courts agree. In 2015, a California court ruled a woman was owed thousands in employee benefits by the company for just 2 months of driving. A similar decision came in 2017 from a Brazilian court, who determined that Uber owed a driver $10,000 in compensation for overtime, night shifts, holidays, and expenses like gasoline and water. An even much more impactful decision came from the UK in November of 2017, when a London court reaffirmed that the company's workers must be considered employees and are therefore entitled to standard employee benefits. But Uber, who tries to maintain the image that they care about their drivers, is appealing the decision, determined not to offer their workers the most basic company benefits.
Do they get medical benefits and things like that?
No, they're independent contractors.
And even worse, instead of spending money on those benefits, Uber instead spends massive amounts on lobbyists to convince local authorities around the world to let them continue conducting business in this way. In fact, researchers found that Uber and Lyft deployed more lobbyists in 2016 than Microsoft, Amazon, and Walmart combined. Uber spent $1.2 million on lobbying efforts in just the first half of 2017, doing everything in their power to avoid any regulation around their new business model. So the narrative that they're a company of the people, for the people, is kind of just, well, bullshit. And this is important across the board with the rise of tech companies who claim to be revolutionizing our world. Yes, they're certainly profoundly changing our day-to-day existence, but in a world in which Apple installed nets around their factories to avoid mass worker suicide, in a world in which Google is helping the Pentagon build AI for their drones, in a world in which Uber spends millions in order to avoid paying their drivers minimum wage, it's important to remember that new technology is not the same as revolutionary spirit. Though Uber would like to be seen as a progressive company saving the world one ride at a time, in many ways, these ride-sharing apps really just exploit workers in new, innovative ways.
Piece of cake.